image and voice in the broadcast and recording of this event. I guess it includes me too. So let's get going. So as I told you yesterday, this is going to be it's a mini course on congestion pricing, carpooling, matching, all of the above. And yesterday we covered lecture 1. It was all about matching. It was a lot of classical results on matching. And today we're going to do something very, very different. I mean, there is going to be a little bit of matching, but it's going to be completely mechanical and very, like the matching component is going to be very important, but very boring mathematically. And all the interesting stuff is going to come from the congestion dynamics. Okay, and most of the lecture today is going to be based on, this classical paper of 1969 that most economists actually don't know about, but after today's lecture you will know about it, and you will see why I'm such a fan of that paper. And then we will add something to that model and see why I'm so excited about bringing together congestion pricing and carpooling. All right, so I showed you this photo of a congested road yesterday, and if you talk to an economist who hasn't thought too deeply about this, or even somewhat deeply, the solution seems straightforward. It's like, look, it's a textbook solution. We've had the solutions for this problem for more than a century. If only this, silly civilians listened to us, we would have fixed all of their problems. Okay, and that was my view as well until I started thinking about this. Like congestion pricing is, there's Pigou, there is, night around the same time, Vickers. So, what could be more straightforward than just charging people for the externalities that they create? And the basic logic is here. I mean, there are lots of places where you can find this basic logic. There are lots of open tutorials by economists. This one is from Yale economists, Barry Nailbuff and Steve Berry and others, who says, in the paper called, in the open editorial in their local newspaper called "How We Learn to Love the Toll," by charging people higher tolls during rush hour, tolls can operate as a congestion tax that channels people with more flexible schedules to drive at different times, and they also say the toll can also encourage people to take different modes of transportation, such as the train and public transit, thereby creating cleaner air, benefiting the environment. Right. So the logic is rock solid. Many of you have taught, the taxing externalities. Most of you have seen it in class. The most, at least in the United States, the most widely, the most common textbook by Greg Menke, Microeconomics, at least the last time I checked, the latest edition had this reprint of a blog post from the Free Economics blog called "Why You'll Love Paying for Roads That Used to Be Free." And again, it has the same spirit. Of course, if you just tax externalities, everything is going to be beautiful. Now, the problem is many people clearly don't seem to love the idea of paying for roads that used to be free. Right? It's just like, if everything is so wonderful, why is there so much opposition? And every time a particular area starts talking about congestion pricing, there's immediately huge outcry. I mean, it's just completely universal. Right? So if you look at pretty much any part of the world, here's the latest illustration. In the last lecture, lecture 4, I'm going to talk about New York congestion pricing in more detail. But for now, all I will say is that while the program was being discussed and proposed, lots of different people and organizations try to block it from happening. For example, here is a screenshot from the state of New Jersey. This is the governor of New Jersey. New Jersey is a state right next to New York City. It's literally across the river. So a lot of people who live in New Jersey commute to New York City for work. And here is the governor. This is, about 3 years ago while the program was still being discussed. And by the way, some of those lawsuits are still pending, right? It's not like, I mean, it's working, but there are still lawsuits in the pipeline, I think including this one. So Governor Murphy announces filing of lawsuit to block New York's proposed congestion price tolling program, signs bipartisan legislation, right? If you know anything about the United States, it's very divided politically. It's rare to have something bipartisan. This one, both parties in New Jersey just, want to stop it, announce the filing of a lawsuit against, everyone imaginable to block the ill-conceived congestion pricing plan. Let me see what else. The last line. Governor Murphy has remained a staunch advocate for New Jersey commuters, transportation agencies, businesses and residents who would suffer as a result of this unreasonable and unprecedented proposal. Okay, so what's going on? Let's try to understand why there is such a disconnect between, economists who seem so kind of almost cavalier about this. It's like, oh yeah, we've known this for 100 years, and then, no regular people who seem to oppose it so strongly, and is it like let's try to reconcile. And it turns out, and here is another actually empirical paper. It's not just sort of anecdotes. There's a wonderful empirical paper in Econometrica by Gabriel Kreindler, where he actually tries to measure people's preferences by running a wonderful field experiment in Bangalore. If you're at all interested in the topic of transportation and congestion pricing, it's a great paper to read. So I studied the peak hour traffic congestion equilibrium in Bangalore, ran a field experiment. Commuter responses in the experiment reveal moderate schedule inflexibility. Policy simulations show that optimal congestion charges would lead to a small reduction in travel time, small commuter welfare gains. Overall, this result suggests limited commuter welfare benefits from peak spreading traffic policies in cities like Bangalore. Okay, so it's sort of, there's clearly some tension. So in this lecture, the plan is I'm going to first explain that commuters are not necessarily wrong in their opposition to congestion pricing. And the issue is when we talk about taxing externalities, we think about overall social welfare. Okay, and that absolutely, our math is correct. It's not like I'm not saying Pigou was wrong in his math, but we look at the entire welfare of the entire system. Whereas if you look at the welfare of just the commuters themselves, that will not go up after congestion pricing. And in fact, this point was made by Vickery in 1969, although he took a different spin on it, and we can discuss the interpretation. But first, I'll just show you the math. Now, then I'm going to do a bit of a detour, talk a bit about self-driving cars. And the reason is, there is this view that, like with self-driving cars, I can sleep in the car, I can work in the car, so, maybe it's not an issue if there is traffic congestion. And based on using another paper that makes an observation about the Vickery model, I'll show that that's also misguided. Now, what help, what I think will really solve the issue is the combination of congestion pricing and convenient carpooling. And that I will show that will increase commuter welfare even if the government just destroys all the revenues. So there you really will have a meaningful improvement. Okay? All right, let's jump into it. So here is this awesome model by Vickery, 1969. One of the things I love about this paper and this model is that instead of, as now is customary in economics papers, starting with some general model and, having Banach spaces and, all kind of fancy bells and whistles, he conveys the whole point just with a numerical example, right? And I'll do that. So what you see here is kind of the Vickery paper. The only difference for now, then we will introduce carpooling. That's going to be our contribution. But the only difference on this slide from the actual Vickery paper is that since 1969, if you go look at the level of inflation, dollar has depreciated by almost exactly a factor of 10. So I took Vickrey's numbers and just multiplied them by 10. Okay? Other than that, this is straight from Vickrey. The whole point is made through this numerical example. Of course, you can, once you see the example, you can sort of see how to expand it and generalize it, but there is no need to do it because it makes the point so cleanly. All right. So in the model, there are 7,200 travelers crossing a bottleneck during their morning work commute, right? So it's the simplest possible model. A whole bunch of people, 7,200, are going from point A to point B, okay? And their ideal times for passing this bottleneck are distributed uniformly between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., okay? So if there was no capacity constraint, right, if the road was really wide, then every minute there would be 120 cars passing this bottleneck, okay? And just for convenience, we're going to assume that it takes 0 time for these people to travel from home to the bottleneck, and it takes 0 time for them to travel from the bottleneck to work. So it's all about just this one bottleneck, right, this congested road. Now, what makes this paper interesting, what makes this model interesting is that there is a bottleneck, okay? The capacity of the road is only 60 cars per minute can pass through this bottleneck, okay? So let's think about just naively what would happen here. So suppose it's the first day the bottleneck appeared, right? Maybe like the road used to have 2 lanes and now there is construction, suddenly there is 1 lane and no one expected that. Well, what's going to happen is cars will continue arriving at this bottleneck, as they were planning to pass through it. And only half as many cars as are arriving will be able to pass through the bottleneck, right? The rate is 1/2, so there will be a queue that will start accumulating, okay? And the queue will reach its maximum size at 9 a.m., right? By 9 a.m., all 7,200 people will have arrived, but only half of them will have passed. So the queue will be 3,600 people, and then after that, no new cars are arriving, so the queue will start dissipating, and everyone will pass through the bottleneck by 10 a.m. Okay, so it takes 2 hours to pass. Make sense? All right. Now, of course, that's not an equilibrium. Why is it not an equilibrium? Because, well, first of all, we haven't specified any preferences, right? So far, it's just completely mechanical. But just intuitively, just think about your own behavior when you're driving in traffic, right? You know that if you need to get to work by, 9 a.m., if you know there is traffic, you're going to leave home earlier, right? We all do that. It's not some kind of hypothetical behavior. And so here, after the first day, after a whole bunch of those people were late for work, they say, oh, there is now traffic, I need to leave earlier, okay? And so what Vickrey is doing is, well, how is it going to equilibrate? What's going to be the equilibrium in this model, okay? And now, of course, to figure out what the equilibrium is going to be, you need preferences. And he makes the simplest possible preferences. Again, the goal here is to make the points as transparently as possible. So he says, look, I'm going to have 4 parameters in this model, right? It's all about your relative values for different types of time, right? It's not just one value of time. There are like a bunch of different ones. So he says, well, let's normalize your value of time in traffic to 0. Right, so a minute you spend in traffic, in the queue, just has 0 value. Then a minute you spend at home is worth 20 cents to you per minute. So the way to think about this, what really matters here are the differences in the value of time, right? The absolute values don't matter. So clearly, sitting at home doing something is better than being stuck in traffic, and he says the delta is 20 cents. Now, these are commuters going to work, so we need to also figure out what their value of time on the job is. And Vickrey says, well, you could come to work early. Like, for example, if we know there's going to be traffic, you could leave at 6 a.m., right, and instantly get to work, but then you're at work, 2.5, 3 hours early, depending on your ideal arrival time. Now, being at work early is still better than being stuck in traffic, because you can do stuff, you can brew coffee, you can sort of walk around, but it's better to be at home. That's your sort of baseline. And so he says, let's say that if you're early at work, then your value of time is kind of split equally between being in traffic and being at home. Okay, so 10 cents. And then, of course, you're going to work. So being late takes, a minute away from work, and that's the most valuable time, right? That's why you're going to work. If that value was less than the value of being at home, you wouldn't commute in the first place. And so the value of 1 minute at work after your ideal arrival time is 40 cents. Okay, so that's it. Those are the 4 parameters, or more like 3, because the only thing that matters are the differences. Okay? Yes? Well, the cost of being late is exactly this 40 cents, right? So the way to think about this, it's the value of a minute. So if your ideal arrival time is 8:30 and you are at work at 8:32, you forego that 40 cents. So that's exactly this minus this is the cost of being late. Okay, that's how he models it. It's a very elegant and uniform way to model all of these things: being early, being late, etc. Okay. All right. So now that we have this, we can solve the model. And at first, it seems like, well, it's kind of complicated, because there's all these cars. People have there's all the heterogeneity in people's ideal arrival time. So how are we going to solve it? And it turns out that it's not very complicated if you can look at this very important object. We'll start drawing pictures of this in a bit. So this very important object is Q of t, which is the amount of time that a commuter will need to spend waiting in a queue if he wants to leave the bottleneck at time t, right? So we can think about the size of the bottleneck. We can model it as when you arrive or when you depart, okay? So in other words, if you want to be, in equilibrium, if you want to be at work at 8:50 a.m., then you need to get to the queue at 8:50 a.m. minus Q of 8:50 a.m., right? So you need to say, okay, to get to work at that time, that's the size of the queue, so I need to arrive at the queue at that time, okay? And the key observation, and it's an obvious one, but it's it's still important to make, is that this function Q of t is the same for all commuters, right? They have heterogeneous preferences, but this equilibrating object, they're all facing the same Q of t, right? Because the assumption here is each one is infinitesimally small relative to the population, okay? So then we say, all right, so there is going to be this Q of t. Let's try to characterize it. Let's try to figure out what it looks like. And the way we're going to characterize it is we're going to say, look, clearly the commuters, okay, let's scratch that. Consider a commute. Clearly some commuters will arrive at work early and some of them will arrive late. Okay, so there's going to be, because it takes 2 hours for all of them to pass. There is an hour interval in the middle. That's their ideal arrival times. Some will be early, some will be late. Pick any commuter who is late. All right, and just to make it simpler, pick one, not the very last one, but someone who arrives at the interior of this interval and who is late. And everyone is optimizing, right? It's an equilibrium model. So and by the way, just as an aside, there is obviously, after we introduced various notions of equilibrium, people have spent many years trying to figure out, will people in reality actually play in equilibrium? Traffic is one of the few cases where I think it's a very clean and realistic assumption, because you go to work every day, you really learn, and you're small relative to the entire population. So I think this is one of the settings where the assumption that people are playing in equilibrium is as close to reality as anywhere in economics. All right, so it's an equilibrium, so the person is optimizing. That person could have shifted his arrival time by epsilon minutes, right? So I arrive at even epsilon minutes later. Now let's just do the math of how his total utility would change if he did that. His value of time at work is reduced by epsilon times wj, right, at 40 cents, exactly to your point. He's even more late by epsilon more, so his penalty for being late is increased by that amount. Now, he's in the queue, so he's now going to be in the queue longer by q of t plus epsilon minus q of t, right? Because he's now arriving epsilon later. Up to the first order, it's just epsilon times the derivative of q prime of t times his value of time in the queue plus little o. Now, I didn't have to do it because the value of time in the queue is 0 by assumption. So this term is just 0. But in one of the extensions I'm going to show you, I'm going to play with this value of time in the queue. That's going to be the self-driving car point. And so for that, I would need this calculation. But for now, I actually don't. All right. And finally, the most subtle point, I mean, it's not that subtle, but it's the one where it's easiest to make a mistake, is what about his value of time at home? Well, let's see how much more or less time. Well, he'll have more time at home because he's arriving later, but how much more? Well, he was initially arriving at time t, which means that he was leaving home at t minus q of t. Now he says, I'm going to arrive at t plus epsilon. So his departing time from home is going to be t plus epsilon minus q of t plus epsilon. Okay? So if you look at how much his time at home has increased, it's t plus epsilon minus t, that's just epsilon, minus whatever time he's spending in the queue, right? The change in the spending in the queue. And so once we bring all of this together, we say, well, if I decide to arrive at work epsilon minutes later, then, you know, this expression right here is the change in my utility. Now, by the first order condition, right, he has to be optimizing, because if it's not optimal, he could arrive either a little bit earlier or a little bit later, right? So this has to be 0. So by the first order condition becomes you just take a derivative with respect to epsilon, and you just get this very simple expression. This that how these things have to equalize, which you can rearrange, and basically you pin down the slope of this q function at any point t just from those 4 variables, right? Because basically, even without going, variable by variable in this formula, the intuition is, well, I'm arriving at a certain point. I'm trading off all of those 4 different things, so they have to pin down, how the time in the queue changes depending on whether I arrive later or earlier. Right, and we all do that, right? Sometimes you say, oh, I'm going to stay at work 15 minutes later in order to, traffic will dissipate. Or sometimes you say, I know that traffic starts building up at a particular time. I can leave earlier today. I'm going to leave half an hour earlier in order to beat traffic. So this is kind of very much how we do this. All right, so once you have that, you pin down the slope of this function q, and if you remember the numbers, they were 40 cents. Value of time at home is 20 cents. Value of time at the job from being late is 40 cents. So at the top you have 20 minus 40. In the denominator you have 20 minus 0. So for these particular values, we find that q prime of t has to be equal to -1 in the region of Q of t where people are arriving to work late. Okay? Now we're going to do exactly this. I'm going to skip it, but it's exactly the same logic for people who arrive at work early, before their ideal arrival times. And it's going to be exactly the same expression, except that now instead of Wj, I have Wp. Remember, Wp was the value of a minute if you're at work early, which was set at 10 cents. Okay? And so now we have 20 minus 10 at the top, 20 minus 0 at the bottom. So we have a slope of 0.5 before for those who arrive at work early. Okay? So without yet computing the actual numbers, I mean, I do that here, but just to explain where it comes from. So what will Q of t look like? Again, this is the main object in this model. Well, it's kind of like if at midnight and 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. it's at 0, right? If for some reason you want to arrive at some crazy early time, you can do that. Then at some point it will start building up at the slope of 0.5. Okay? It's going to reach a peak, and then it's going to start going down at the rate of -1. Okay? At the slope of -1. And we also know the base of this triangle. Okay, the base of this triangle is 2 hours, right? Because it takes 2 hours for everyone to dissipate. So the only thing that's left to determine is exactly where this triangle is located, right? So this 2-hour base, 0.5 slope in the beginning, -1 slope at the end. And to pin down exactly where it's located, we say, oh, wait a second. From the shape, I mean, and this is specific to these numbers, we know that the part where people arrive at work too early is twice as big as the part where people arrive too late. Because remember, people are getting to work at a constant rate of 60 cars per minute, right? And so 2/3 of people will be at work early, and 1/3 of the people is going to be late. And so that means that, and of course, at the very peak, are the people who get to work exactly on time. They spend the most time in traffic, but they get to work exactly on time, and that has to be 2/3 of the interval, which is 8:40 a.m. Okay, so now we can characterize everything, right? So traffic starts building up at 7:20, reaches its peak at 8:40. Well, I should be very careful, right? That when I say it reaches its peak at 8:40. If you actually stand on the side of the road and observe what's happening, that's not what you will see. It reaches its peak for the people who want to be at work at 8:40. Okay, so those people will have to spend the most time in the queue. Then it will start going down and will end at 9:20. So commuters leaving the bottleneck at 8:40 will get to work at their ideal time, but they will spend the longest amount in traffic. They will spend 40 minutes in traffic, so they actually need to get to the queue at 8, and then they will exit it by 8:40. So here is kind of what this looks like. Okay, so that's just this important representation of this queue. This is the most important. Well, there are going to be 2 very important pictures. This is one of them, and then we'll see a lot of variations of it. But make sure you understand everything that's going on here. The 9:20 person is going to arrive at 9:20, right? So that person, this is when traffic is gone, right? You're like, okay, everything is gone. I just leave at 9:20. The same is here, right? So 7:20 and 9:20, they spend 0 time in the queue, but they're the most removed from their ideal arrival time. Okay, so this is going to be the person who is the latest for work. They show up really, really late, but on the upside, they didn't spend any time in the queue. Of course, it's an idealization, but you can all imagine that with some heterogeneity, there will be some people for whom being late at work is a little bit less costly. Maybe it's the boss who's whatever, and he's just like, you know what, I'm going to be stuck. I don't want to be stuck in traffic. So, but that's these people spend 0 time in traffic. These people spend 0 time in traffic. Okay. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to quantify kind of the amount of unhappiness generated by this bottleneck, right? Because we're going to go to congestion pricing. We'll need to start comparing the various costs and benefits. So on average, right? Again, if you just look here, it's a triangle, right? The top of the triangle is 40 minutes. The bottom of the triangle is 0. I mean, I'm talking about the height. So on average, the average commuter spends 20 minutes in the queue, right? Which adds up to, 20 times 7,200, which is the number of commuters, 144,000 minutes. That's one inefficiency, right? Because they could have stayed at home. Now, that's not the only inefficiency. Okay, that's a very important point. Another inefficiency on this, or pain, I don't know if maybe not inefficiency, but pain relative to the world without congestion, is that people get to work at their non-ideal times, right? It's not just that you're stuck in traffic. You also don't get to work at your ideal time. Now we need to be a little bit more careful, right? So all of these people are late to work, and then all of these people are early to work, and you can compute that for those who are late, the total delay is 10 minutes per commuter, the average delay, and then for those who arrive early, it's 20 minutes, so that gives you a total of 96,000 minutes. Okay? Yeah, so in monetary terms, this corresponds to an aggregate disutility of, $28,800 from waiting in the queue, and another $14,400 from suboptimal arrival times. Okay, and like the last thing I will say is the disutility from the commute is the worst for commuters who really need to be at work at the peak time at 8:40, right? They spend 40 minutes in the queue. That's $8 worth of pain. Okay, now the disutility is lowest for those whose work time, whose ideal times are at the ends of the interval, either 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. Now it's not 0, right? Because if you really try to get to work at 8 a.m., right, you have to leave earlier. The easiest way to see what their disutilities are is to say, oh, these are the people who will spend 0 time in the queue. So the disutility, for example, for this person is that they get to work 40 minutes early. And remember, the penalty for being early is 10 cents. Not the penalty, but relative to being at home. So they suffer $4 worth of disutility from this whole queue thing. Okay, so on average, a commuter suffers $6 of disutility. Okay, 8 for that person, 4 for this, and then 6 for everyone in the middle. Yes. So here the assumption is everything. I mean, everything is super simple, right? Everything is uniform, and you don't need, and sort of that's really straightforward. Now the picture is going to be similar, I think, for other distributions, because this doesn't come from distributional assumptions. This comes from indifference conditions, right? Now I would be a little bit worried if you have a very weird distribution. You may start getting holes somewhere in the middle, so I don't know if it's going to work. But this doesn't come. This picture doesn't come from the uniformity, right? It just comes from the indifference conditions. All right. Okay. So this is Vickrey, 1969, and you kind of the first part. There's going to be a congestion pricing part of the paper, but you're going to see why I'm so excited about this paper and this model. And I'm not the only one. It's one of the foundational papers in transportation economics, because you sort of, instead of just having this like reduced form assumption, like more traffic, more cars lead to longer commute times. He's like, well, but it's kind of, it depends on the time. He really kind of opens this black box and says, no, here's how the queue gets formed kind of in real time, minute by minute. And you can do a lot of types of analysis here. All right. So now I'm going to make a detour, no pun intended. And if you read the newspapers, you will see a lot of excitement. Let me see if I have those quotes. No, I don't have. I don't. I should have put some of the excited quotes. It's there in the paper. Some of the excited quotes about how you can do all kind of cool stuff in a self-driving car. So now traffic is not an issue. And just to be clear, right? I know I actually checked before the lecture. So in Brazil, you still don't have self-driving cars for regulatory reasons, right? There are some regulatory bottlenecks, but the technology is here. Like, it's no longer science fiction. The way I think about the date when it was actually became switched, like, even though everything is gradual, if you want one day when self-driving cars became a reality, it's June 25th of 2024, so 2 years ago. And the reason why I say that was the day when Waymo, which is Google's self-driving car subsidiary, opened it up to everyone, right? Up to this point, they had like wait lists and beta testers and everything. But on that date, they announced it in San Francisco. Anyone with an app, so any one of you can download the Waymo app, and if you travel to, now it's more cities than that, became available to the public, right? Not as a prototype, not as a test, just as an actual service. And it's spreading around the world very quickly. So now it's not just Waymo. There are Zooks in the United States. There are 2 or 3 companies in China. So like, this is real. Like, self-driving cars are a reality, and that's going to be important for my lecture tomorrow. Anyway, so why will that not save us, right? Why isn't the point that, I'll just sleep in the car or I'll work in the car, and so my commute is not as painful? Why is that not right? And the reason why it's not right is that if you have access to self-driving cars, you're not the only person who has access to a self-driving car, right? If you were the only person, that's absolutely true, right? So you're in that setting, you get your self-driving car, and clearly, individually, it's better off. But we're economists, and there is such a thing as an equilibrium. So we need to think about the equilibrium effect. Well, let's do it. It's actually very simple in the context of this model. So suppose the value of time and traffic is now higher. Instead of being a complete waste, let's make it 4 cents. Okay, and by the way, this will work. 4 is just to get nice fractions here. You can pick any number less than 10 cents. Okay, so the value of time of being stuck in traffic just went up. Well, the logic about this Q function that I described before didn't change. Okay, so it's still Q prime for those who are late is still given by this formula, and Q prime for those who are early is given by that formula. Okay, and so now we need to plug in, instead of 0, we're plugging in here 4 cents for WQ. Okay, and so what we get is that the slopes now change. The slope for those who are early is 5/8, and the slope for those who are late is negative 5/4, right? So that everything became steeper. So it looks like this. Okay, so the dotted line is the old Q function, and the black line is the new Q function with these higher slopes. It still takes 2 hours for the traffic to pass, but now because the slopes got multiplied by 5/4, this person needs to wait in traffic for 50 minutes instead of 40 minutes. Okay, make sense? So it's just a kind of very standard reequilibration. And when you do the computation, I'm not going to go through them one by one, it turns out that you're, in the utilitarian terms, you're exactly in the same place where you started, right? It's not like some of the surplus is dissipated. It's entirely dissipated, okay? And basically what happens is your value of time per minute of being, that your disutility of being in the car per minute went down, but the total amount of time you wait in traffic got multiplied by the same amount, right? So basically, the whole system re-equilibrate in exactly the place where you started, right? So in not, if you think about this in plain English, basically instead of having heavy traffic as we have right now, we're going to have just like one giant parking lot full of self-driving cars with people sleeping in those cars, right? Which is probably even more terrifying. Now, this is not to say that there is no benefit in self-driving cars. Clearly, there are times of day when there is no traffic, so then you benefit. They're safer, right? So there is like all the fatalities and accidents. So there is benefit, absolutely. But for the specific problem that I'm talking about, like in the congestion during rush hour, they're not going to help. Yes? Because I still have the same number of cars. So that's exactly the point, right? That's exactly the issue, right? You still have the same number of cars. Like I'm now sleeping in the car, but it's still the same 7. That's exactly where carpooling is going to come into the picture. Okay? Yes. You had a hand. That's actually so there is a paper I know. If you send me an email, I'll send you this paper that answers this question in a slightly different context, where everyone has the same ideal arrival time. And yeah, I think the way it works is the way you think. That those who have access to self-driving car benefit, and those who do not are worse off. Okay. Yes. I mean, you can solve this. It's sort of, again, this is the most stripped down version possible. Once you start having heterogeneity, you will start getting some people better off, some people worse off. I wouldn't. No, not necessarily, right? Because once you sort of start like, because you need to start thinking who's in difference condition binds at what place, so it's going to be a bit more delicate. But again, we're here. Like the first order effect, I think is well captured by this, right? It basically shifts you from, oh my God, self-driving cars are amazing, and I'll just work from the car, to, oh my God, everyone is gonna do that, and now traffic is gonna be horrible. Like I wouldn't take this completely literally, but like as a super important force, I think this is still gonna be correct. Yes. The behavior is not gonna be the same, right? So actually, let me show you. I have just the graph to explain that. Okay. And by the way, this was a later addition to this presentation because I kept getting this question, and then I realized that this is actually very helpful. So remember that Q of t was the function of the departure of the time when I leave the bottleneck. And if I want to leave the bottleneck at Q of t at time t, I need to get there at t minus Q of t. So here is the same diagram, but it's showing this function b of t instead of Q of t, where b of t is the time when I get to the bottleneck. Okay, and that's basically explaining what's going on, right? This is kind of reverse engineering what these things need to be. And basically in the past, right, we started arriving at 7:20, and the peak, if someone was standing by the side of the road measuring it on the arrival times, would be at 8 a.m. And those are the people who get to work by 8:40. Now, with the self-driving cars, because I'm not as worried about being stuck in traffic, people will be arriving faster. So the queue will get formed much faster, right? The rate of arrival is going to be higher over this interval. The peak is going to be at 7:50, and then it will start dissipating. Okay? All right. So self-driving cars won't save us. What about congestion pricing, right? I kind of said in the very beginning that we have this textbook solution, and I kind of scared you that it's not going to work. So let's work through it. And in fact, that's in the original Vickers paper. So 1969, he says, look, let's figure out how we can introduce congestion pricing here. And incidental, the point of his paper was not that. The point was to try to figure out what the tolls should be, time-sensitive tolls, right? Because a lot of the work, even Pigou would just say, oh, like we should just charge and some number. And Vickers said, well, but we need to charge different numbers at different times. Let me try to think through exactly what this should look like. So that's the exercise. Now we still have 2 hours that the cars will be passing, right? It still like takes them 2 hours. So we need to have some tolls, and intuitively, in the very beginning, tolls have to be 0. And at the very end, tolls have to be 0 because there is no reason to charge people at those times. And then they will start rising in the beginning, and then they will start falling. So just like before, we need to find 2 slopes: slope in the beginning, slope at the end. Well, we would pin down those slopes in exactly the same way as before, right? We say that some people are going to be late for work. We need to have an indifference condition for them. Some people will be early for work. We need to have an indifference condition for them. Now, instead of having this Q function that we're pinning down now, we're pinning down the P function, which is the toll on those who are departing the bottleneck at time t. Now notice that here we're assuming there is no Q, right? So you arrive and depart the bottleneck at exactly the same time t. So we write those first order conditions in the same exact fashion as before, and we find that for those who are late, the slope is negative 20 cents per minute. And for those who are early, the slope is 10 cents a minute. So we also have a triangle, but now this triangle is in tolls. So let's see what it looks like. And spoiler, this is the same exact graph I showed you before, like literally the same slope, except that instead of having 40 minutes here, I have $8. So basically what happens is, this is the New Jersey letter and everything else. Commuters are not better off, right? So basically what happens to commuters is whatever they used to pay in terms of in time, they're now paying in dollars. And if you think about what's going on, like after you see this, you're like, oh, it couldn't have been any other way. Why is that? Well, you have some demand, you have some capacity, and demand exceeds capacity, right? So something needs to equilibrate this demand and the capacity. When in the old world, it's equilibrated, the price is this Q, right? This both Q the letter and Q as in being stuck in traffic. Now you switched from time payment to monetary payment, but it's still the same demand and it's still the same supply. So it's the same magnitudes need to clear that imbalance between demand and supply, right? And now, of course, you know, if you didn't have all this linear assumptions, if you had more complicated assumptions, things wouldn't be exactly the same. But again, this is all about first order effects. Up to the first order, you are exactly where you started. Yes? This model is not partial equilibrium. This is a complete equilibrium model under the assumption that everyone has those values of time that I showed you. So all the people who would have taken a bus, they are already taking a bus beforehand, right? There is nothing here because like we specified there, right? So there is no sense in which like that margin is not there. And by the way, if that's the case, people who are switching from this to bus, they're not happy, right? So yeah, so although we'll get to this point, like there's going to be a little bit more subtle. Anyway, so that's sort of that's this fundamental point. Like once you see it, you're like, oh wait, now all these people, all these New Jersey people, it's not that they misunderstand the toll. They see like, of course this is an approximation, but up to the first order, like they're not better off. Okay. So you know, so this congestion pricing, with this age-old thing that we all know and love, it actually has two problems. One of them I already talked about, right? So none of the commuters are better off. Of course, of course, social welfare went up because all this dead weight loss of being stuck in traffic is now turns into money, and presumably the government can do something good with the money now. Maybe there are some governments in the world where people just trust them to do the right thing with the money. Like in most countries that in the real world that I know would not necessarily trust their government to do the right thing with the revenue. But it's in any case, it's a very hard, politically charged issue. Now, that's not the only problem. Another problem is that you didn't really solve the problem of congestion, right? You kind of monetized it, but there is still an issue that people are arriving to work at not at the ideal times. There is still the fundamental issue that capacity is 60 cars per minute and demand is 120 cars per minute. So like that disutility didn't go away. Okay. All right. So now comes, I have 15 minutes, so I want to leave you with an optimistic message rather than a pessimistic one. So why am I optimistic, and why do I think that things are going to be fantastic fairly soon in terms of traffic congestion? There is really a way to solve it, and that is carpooling. So in the paper, we have the very stylized model of carpooling. We just say just 2 people per car. Okay, and that's enough for our purposes. Of course, in practice, first of all, there can be more people per car. Second, you can think of carpooling as a metaphor for various more dense forms of transportation. For example, in a lot of parts of the world, you have those minivans, all right, that are kind of very adaptable, right? When there is some imbalance between supply and demand, they can redeploy their routes very quickly. They're sort of very flexible, and you can think of that as yet another form of carpooling, right? It's all about putting multiple people in the same vehicle. Okay, so let's think about that. And in the spirit of Vickrey, we're going to make this super simple, right? We want to just make the simplest possible change to the paper. We're just going to say that carpooling incurs on each of the carpooling partners a small disutility delta. Okay? Which just additively enters their payoff, right? So it's the same as before, but if you carpool, it's the same utility minus delta. Now, how do we know that this delta is positive? Well, because in the real world, at least in most developed countries, people don't carpool, right? Like they may drive with their kids to work, they may drive with their kids to their daycare and then go to work. And there is, it's clearly an exaggeration to say that people don't carpool. There are some like small numbers, but it's like single-digit percentages. Right, by and large, most people don't carpool. So delta is 0. Now, first, because our paper is called, we really are about the complementarity. If you just introduce carpooling, right? Suppose you change delta from a high number to a slightly lower one, right? You made it more convenient. Nothing changes in the outcomes, right? It's almost like a prisoner's dilemma. Everyone would be better off if everyone carpooled. But individually, no matter what everyone else is doing, I'm better off not carpooling. Okay? And so the kicker comes here, right? That's really where all my optimism comes from. It's carpooling plus congestion pricing. And the key here is the same congestion pricing, but the intuition is going to be very different. The main force of congestion pricing is not going to be to force people to arrive later or earlier. It's going to be to induce them to carpool. Okay? So our assumption is 2 people per car, no distinction between passenger and driver. If you're carpooling, you're incurring a disutility of delta versus driving solo. So first, this is actually not going to be optimal, but this is the easiest one to see. Suppose you just say, you know what, I'm going to introduce a toll of 2 delta, and the toll is on the car, right? So now I have it, let's say it's 2.1 delta. Okay, so any number more than 2 delta. So then if I drive solo, then I incur this utility of 2 delta or 2.1 delta. If instead I carpool, I split that in half, right? I only pay, if there are 2 people in the car, each one of us pays half of the toll, because the toll is imposed on the car, of course, because the car is the object that creates congestion, and so I am better off because I incur this utility of delta from carpooling and half of 2 delta in the monetary terms. And so I am better off carpooling than not carpooling. But here is the kicker. This meaningfully changes what you were asking about the base. So now that there are 2 people per car, they all get to work at their ideal time, right? We double the capacity of the road as measured in people, not in cars. Okay, and so this completely eliminates this utility from late or early arrivals. Now, this is very simple and kind of obvious. Turns out this is not optimal. So why is this not optimal? The reason why it's not optimal is, delta is small, but it's not 0. And so when you're close to the, you can try to read this, or I'll show you a picture in a moment. When you're close to the ends of this interval, when you're close to 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., it's actually better to have people drive solo, small mass of people to drive solo, be a little bit late for work, a little bit early for work, but not incur the disutility of carpooling, because the disutility of carpooling is some discrete delta, whereas when you're close to the ends of the interval, you only have second order losses from being late or early. Okay? And so the optimal, I'm gonna skip all of that, I'll just show you the picture. So the optimal toll schedule for, here I assume the particular value delta equal to 2, delta equal to $2, looks like this. Okay? So in the middle, we're going to have an interval where everyone carpools. Okay? And there we have this toll of 2 delta. This is kind of the peak time, the heaviest traffic in the old world. Okay? Now, here, when the black part of the toll schedule, people are driving solo, and the tolls are increasing in exactly the same fashion as before. And here, people are also driving solo, and some of them are late for work. And again, the slope is computed in exactly the same fashion as before. But of course, because of this red interval, that's really the key part here, we're able to shrink the interval over which the cars are arriving. And so what I have here is the dotted line are the old tolls without carpooling, or you can think of this as Q of t, and this is with carpooling. And so crucially, if you look at commuter welfare, they're all strictly better off by a first order amount, even if the government burns all the revenue, right? So this whole thing, like the government is going to collect revenue, then they're going to redistribute it, that's going to make things, hopefully they do that, but even if they don't, everyone ends up being strictly better off. Yes? Well, so, again, this is, they could, the whole point in the old model, we didn't think about carpooling, so we didn't think about the equilibrium effects or anything like that, right? The whole point of our paper is we should think about that. We should think about carpooling, and then design tolls accordingly and think about the effects accordingly. Yeah. Okay, so here is a table that's basically puts all of these things in one kind of in one place. So at the top, so we have the regime, the very first Vickery 1969 paper, right? So we have no tolls, no carpooling. Then all the disutility comes from either displaced arrival times or waiting in queue. Okay. The total social cost is 43,000 and change. The social cost per commuter is $6, and there's no money changing hands here, so the average commuter cost is also $6. Okay, so that's the starting point. That's what we're trying to improve. If you have self-driving cars, which sounds like such a cool thing, none of these change, right? Or really, all of that just gets dissipated by people getting to the queue sooner. If you have no tolls, and carpooling, again, no change because no one is carpooling. That's sort of the world in which we are right now. Now, things get more interesting. This is, Victory 1969, when you don't think about carpooling, but you do have tolls, okay? So then waiting in the queue disappears, right? That's just gone, right? That's the whole point of those tolls. Displaced arrival times are still there, right? They didn't go anywhere. Now the total social cost is just those displaced arrival times, right? If you think about society as a whole. But total commuter cost is not, because commuters pay this cost of displaced arrival times and they pay the tolls, right? So their cost did not change, right? That's the lawsuit from the governor of New Jersey and a whole bunch of other people like that. And so there is this huge gap between what commuters are facing per person, which is still $6, and the social cost that would have been improved. So now this is sort of these six rows are kind of the main point of the paper. So now we say, oh, what if there is actually tolls and there is carpooling? And there can be different levels of this utility from carpooling, right? We have $3, $2, and $1 per person. Now, the easiest thing to do is the simple tolls, right? Where you just charge a toll of twice the disutility. Then, there are no displace times. There's no waiting in queue. It's also easy to implement, right? And then what you get is the average commuter costs. There is still a gap between the commuter cost and the social cost, but it's basically twice the disutility from carpooling. And so another message you get is that it is and in the paper we're actually talking quite a bit of detail about various policies. It's very important to reduce the disutility from carpooling as much as possible, right? Like create platforms for it, legal environment. We talk a lot about this in the paper, of approaches to do that. Now, if you do optimal tolls, things get a bit more complicated, but even better. Now, there is some displaced arrival time, right? Because as I showed you in this picture, around the edges, you're actually happy with people driving solo. And for example, if you're able to reduce the disutility from carpooling to $1, then the social cost per commuter of the whole bottleneck issue is much lower. It's like 1/8 of what it was before, only 87 cents. But even with paying the tolls, if you look at just the commuters, their cost is under $2, so much better than before. Okay. So, conclusion, and I'm right on time. These things individually, so autonomous transportation or road pricing or carpooling, on their own, none of them will help with that traffic congestion picture I showed you last time. Now, what will really help is the combination of intelligent road pricing and convenient carpooling, right? That will substantially improve commuter welfare, even if the government burns all the revenues down. And sort of the key driving force, the way to think about this, why is this happening? What's happening is without carpooling, what tolls do, all they do is they shift the price from time cost to monetary cost without really changing the magnitude, so that doesn't benefit the commuters. Now, once you have carpooling, the monetary cost is fundamentally different from the time cost. Why is that? Well, because if you put more people in the car, they can split the monetary cost, but they cannot split the time cost, right? Right now, if I carpool to work and I have to spend $5 worth of my time in traffic, If I'm carpooling with someone, each one of us spends $5 worth of time in traffic. But if it's charged in dollars and not in time, then that $5 we can split it, and each one of us pays only $2.50, right? And that's really the key difference between monetary costs and the time costs. And then, of course, once that starts happening, once we're able to split this cost, then the throughput of the road also increases, right? So it's almost like we were able to double the throughput of the road without making any technological changes. Of course, all we're doing is we're just eliminating existing waste that most cars are driving 80% empty, and that increase in capacity lowers the price, right? It's almost like you increase the supply, you keep the demand the same, the price drops, consumers benefit. All right, so that's all I have today, and then tomorrow we're going to bring all of this together. I'm going to talk about not just this very mechanical matching, but like actual matching of carpooling and with self-driving cars, and sort of talk about hope for the future, and lots of work for market designers to do. Okay, see you tomorrow.